So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds. My name's Tom Fodden, and I'm the slightly out of breath chair of Grand Rounds as I've run across the campus, as it were. I was delivering an undergraduate lecture to the first year medical students, and then whisked my way across from the Wolfson Lecture Theatre back to my office for the next most important part of the day, which is Grand Rounds. So thank you very much for joining. And this week, slightly later than last year, Rory McCrimmon is here to give the review of 2022, the annual review of what's been happening in the medical school. Now, I must apologise, Rory, in my email late last night, I accidentally called you the Dean of Undergraduate Medicine, which is not true. You're the Dean of the Medical School, so apologies. Accuracy costs nothing, as I tell my children. So, but Rory, I'm sure, is well known to all of us as Professor of Diabetes Research, consultant endocrinologist and diabetologist, and Dean of the Medical School. This is always very entertaining, very interesting. Like I said in my email last night, I think it's remarkable the breadth of work that goes on in the university, the excellence that's carried out by staff and students alike. And this is a great opportunity to find out what's going on in Dundee University Medical School, how we might be able to get involved, and what those opportunities are. So Rory, thanks very much for coming along. And I know you're coming along a bit later in the semester to talk about diabetes research, so you get the double shift. So thanks very much again. Usual scenario, questions in the chat if you have them, bit of time at the end for cameras on questions. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. What I'll do is I'll share my screen with you now. Can you see that, Tom?
Yep, we can see that.
And which view are you in now at the moment?
The wrong one. You'll need to switch them around.
How's that?
No. Oh, yep, that's right. We've got it now. Brilliant.
Fantastic. Okay, so as Tom said, and you can hear me clearly enough, Tom.
Yeah, we're spot on. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Well, look, as Tom said, for those of you who are here and for those of you who are going to come in on YouTube later on, I always think it's a good idea just to give you an idea of the work that is happening within the medical school and that has happened in the medical school and broadly the university over the last year. I mean, a large part, of course, because our work is so intertwined and we are so reliant on our NHS colleagues, both in the delivery of our educational programs, but also much of the research and the work we do. And of course, we work, together in so many different aspects of care. So I think it's important to show you that information. I'm going to apologize to a lot of the medical school staff who are already on this call, who have seen this talk in a slightly different version given towards the end of last year. As you can see, 7th of December, 2022, when I gave out the first talk beforehand. But I hopefully still provide some sort of interest to you all. So very broadly, we start out with rankings. Almost all universities do. Life is driven by rankings these days, and to some extent, we have to pay attention to those, although, like anything else, you can't get the rankings getting on top of what you're trying to do. Last year, the schools of dentistry and nursing actually did fabulously well and came out really well in the university top rankings. Dundee University as a whole came fourth in Scotland, but as ever, Dundee is a very research-intensive university, and what you'll see is about 84% of these publications, so these are the manuscripts, papers, pieces of art, things that are put forward to ref, are ranked as being world-leading or internationally excellent. And when you consider Dundee's size and its place, I think it just shows you how we are very research intensive for university, and it's good to see. And then for our students, of course, probably the most important thing is that we remain this #1 position of being the best for student experience in the university, largely, I think, down to the union, which seems to attract people from all over the country, but also Dundee being a real student city with more students per head of the population than any other city in Scotland. And so something we get to celebrate and is really adding to the diversity in Dundee in the long term, which I think is good to see. We've also done really well in terms of spin-out companies. The School of Engineering, Life Sciences and Medicine are looking very hard at how we can commercialize these sort of activities we do and generate small companies to be based within the Dundee region. And I'll come to later on, because we do want to be thinking about employment for that next generation of people coming through and increasing employment in the locality. And then finally, the university had this 5-star rating from this international survey called the QS survey, which is really highly regarded. And the reason I highlight that is actually because the MBCHB program was chosen to be the one that was put forward to be ranked 5-star in all of these areas. And that's testament to the importance both of the program itself and to the reputation Dundee has in this area. So I'm going to focus on different aspects of the school, and we'll take learning and teaching first of all as the one that almost all of us within the hospital are most familiar with. Where were we last year? Well, in the Sunday Times ranking, we were 2nd in Scotland and 3rd in the UK, which I think is a great achievement. Now, we were not so high in the Guardian ranking. The Guardian rankings, it was about 11th, I think. If I remember rightly, we dropped a little bit. The difference between them is that the Times includes research, where the Guardian is just largely around student experience. So work to do, but, you know, quite frankly, all of the Scottish universities are very, very good, and we're almost always in the sort of top 10. And I think that's a really good thing to see, and important for Dundee to continue to show what a good medical school it actually is. We were first in the UK for graduate prospects. So when our students leave the MBCHB program, they're all going into work. And more so, even though it's very, very high, as you can imagine, for medicine as a whole, it's pretty good in Dundee. And our student satisfaction scores, this is the NS survey that goes out every year, which is a reflection of how students are experiencing the MBCHB program, and the benefits they think they are gaining out of it has improved significantly. And my thanks again to all of my colleagues in the NHS who contribute to the teaching, because that's largely, of course, down to the work that you're doing, the work you're doing with the students, and the feedback in particular that they get. So many, many thanks to all of them. In terms of the REF exercise, so every 5 to 6 years, there is a thing called the Research Exercise Framework, which looks at the quality of the outputs and the impact of research from all of the universities in Scotland. And in clinical medicine, which is called Unit of Assessment 1, we did really well, very well, in fact, I think, in the last assessment, which was good to see. And 93%, almost all of our publications ranked as 3 or 4 star, which is the same as Oxford, actually. So it shows the quality. We're much smaller, but the work that we're doing is of the highest quality, which is really great to see. And the top 200 universities of the world for medicine. Again, that's important because in many countries, unless you're a university in the top 200, they will not send students to you. So it is something that is important to us, particularly in the Scottish economy, which is reliant on international students, not just for our income, but largely also because of diversity. The other big thing you'll all have noticed has been the increase in student numbers. And this is just to show you the sort of figures that we are looking at now. We have seen about a 40% increase in numbers over the last 5 years. Part of that is because we have obviously developed the ScotGem program, which I'll show you later on, which is the postgraduate course of medicine. And the final 2 years are within Dundee. But also because of the manifesto commitment from Scottish Government to increase medical student numbers by 100 cumulatively every year. So that, for instance, this year we're about 500 in total above the figures that we were a few years ago. I know that that affects capacity. I know that it's challenging for us to deliver that. On the other hand, what choice do I think we have? You saw Invergowrie practice close the other day. We've had a number of primary care practices showing down. We are 20% down of doctors, of general practitioners in the UK, and we have many positions unfilled, both at doctors and nursing within NHS Tayside. So unless we generate this next, this next generation of doctors, I think we're going to struggle. And this has been accumulating for a long time, because no longer can we work with a model where there is one student comes in and one doctor comes out at the end, because most doctors are working part-time. And so our numbers just do not match. So we have to increase intake, but we also have to think about doing things very, very differently, I think. And I think that's going to come next. This was also the first year last year where we implemented the new curriculum review. Many of you will have taken part in that. I think this was a really extensive process. I'm very grateful for the sort of leadership of Ellie Huttersall and Maggie Bartlett, who pulled this all together, working with, you know, the undergraduate team, as well as our colleagues in the NHS and the various DMEs. And we looked to see what actually was needed in the MBCHB curriculum. How could we refine what we did? How could we streamline what we do? Can we review assessment? Can we review content? And I think we've come up with a really good program. It is, of course, a continually evolving program, and it will continue to change, in particular areas like assessment, which I'm keen on we look in more detail at. But fantastic to see this work come together, really great to see it started. And we're looking forward over the next few years to seeing what is the actual impact of this program. Did it work? Did it make a real difference to the sort of doctors that we are going to generate in 5 years' time? And part of that program as well, try to say, well, what is it we want more beyond the MBCHB program? Because after all, I mean, we have a clinical program in Dundee. Doctors from day one has always been our adage to try and get people clinical exposure early on, as opposed to the more traditional programs. But surely there must be more to it than that. And the GMC requirement, of course, is you have to achieve a certain minimal requirement to be a doctor, which is not fantastically ambitious, is it? So is there something we can do that will make our students become slightly better doctors in the future with a different way of actually looking at things? I'm really keen we think about that in Dundee. We're talking about it in terms of sustainability, design, global citizenship, the idea of a Dundee doctor. And feedback from all of you, colleagues in the NHS, I think would be really helpful here, because there has to be a change, and we have to be doing something differently and something more innovative in Dundee, I think, to try and produce that next generation who are going to cope with what is an incredibly complex world, with data coming at them all over, and where disease patterns are changing, where there's more multimorbidity and health inequalities and things that are really critical that we address that we frankly aren't and haven't for a long time. So part of that also is the healthcare improvement program, which I think is a really exceptional program that is now built in and occurring throughout our MBCHB program. And students can take, these are small 4-week blocks, but they're looking at things like human factors effectiveness, quality improvement, agents and change model, patient safety, using design. I see Rod was on the call. He's obviously been a huge proponent of this, is how we can design different pathways of care, as we did within the emergency department and more recently in acute medical area as well. Thinking about realistic medicine, sustainable healthcare, health inequalities. We've talked about it forever. Health inequalities have just got worse over the last 20 years. So what are we truly doing about it? And how are we really educating our students to recognize that as professionals, we need to be addressing health inequalities in each aspect of the work that we do. So very keen that we push this, and in areas like community engagement and working with third sector and stakeholders as part of what we see our students doing. That design project continued into working with the V&As. The big plastics collection has, if those of you have been in, and of course we should all be using that facility, it's such an amazing facility, is looking at design and plastics in medicine. What's good plastic? What's bad plastics? And if there's one area of sustainability that we can address in the health service, it's our use of disposables and plastics. And perhaps that's one of the next big things that we do. There are also, as I said, these community engagement proctors, working with third sector, working in the community, students spending much more time out with the secondary care setting and into primary care, both within the general practice, but also in the community itself, to get a broader understanding of disease, the factors that lead to disease, and the numerous environmental factors that contribute to how a person will experience that condition. Then we have simulation-based training. I think that this is really taking off and will continue to take off. We've been leading in this area for a long time. Our clinical skills facility, I mean, of course, exacerbated by, highlighted by COVID, but our clinical skills facility took 35,000 students last year, undergraduate and postgraduate. That's an incredible achievement. And I think it's an area that I think we need to develop far, far more often. We're now looking at pharmacists, we have clinical skills with the nurses. I think we should be looking at ways of doing interdisciplinary learning, bringing nurses and nurse students and medical students together in a simulated environment before they actually get to the wards. There is this new ward simulation exercise for refugee doctors in Scotland. We have the new 3D centre that, if you've ever had a chance to go out and see it, it's really fantastic to experience that 3D centre and see people either in a hospital setting with an arrest or in a situation like this with a car accident. And of course, in areas like surgery and surgical skills, we are moving to a model where it can't be see one, do one, teach one anymore. It really is go to simulation-based training, do 100. Get some degree of competence and then start to work in the surgery. I think we need to work more with our local DMEs here, because I think this, we have to be enhancing our own training. We want people to stay in Tayside, and therefore we've got to look at our postgraduates, our trainees in surgery and in medicine, and start to offer much more of this simulation-based training locally to supplement their training and make them think, well, this is the place that they want to be in the long term. And of course, it's great to have doctors who participate in the teaching in these programs. We've made a new appointment. Georgina Cairns has been leading our Gateway program. This is our entry program for medicine for a number of years with a focus on widening participation. This used to be shared with dentistry and other schools, but now it's just going to be medicine alone. Rob Jarvis, who many of you will know, who's been with us for a number of years in a student supervisory role, is now going to take over this program. And I think we want to look, how can we work with our locality, looking at those schools that both in Dundee and in our rural area who haven't sent students into the MBCHB program. Can we look at the wider participation? Can we take them through the Gateway program and then actually take them directly into our MBCHB program rather than being randomly allocated across Scotland? Because we know that if you're from Dundee and you're from this region, you're more likely to stay in this region. And if you are coming from a poorer socioeconomic background, it makes far more sense to stay locally than it does to go to other parts of the country. So that's an area that I'm really hoping we develop, and Rob has kindly taken this on and will drive this forward. A BMSc program, BBSc, suffice to say that we do an awful lot of teaching with biomedical science broadly, either through an intercalated degree, the BMSc, and through now taking almost half the BBSc, the biology and biomedical science students from the life sciences school. The only point I'm going to make here is the foundation program, consequences of it. Foundation program, as many of you know, decided that you no longer would get points for BMSCs, and they felt that this wasn't offering the same opportunity to everyone. They made this decision on the basis of no evidence whatsoever, as far as I can see. But the consequence of that is that the BMSc numbers are dropping, which might then get to the point where it's no longer financially viable to run BMSc courses. So a UK FBO the consequence of that decision might, of course, be that we simply cannot offer that opportunity to anyone at all. So I think, again, it's something we're really wrestling with, because I'm really keen to keep choice and to keep opportunity, but it's a struggle in the financial environments that we work in. And then finally, we had the first ScotGem graduation this year, and I show this up to show how ridiculous they sometimes make us look when it comes to these events. I don't know why. The only good thing about this is that I'm hoping that my picture is blocking out the picture of me, because I graduated from Edinburgh with my higher degree, and sadly they make me wear like pink and red, and who on earth would do something like that? But at least I don't get to wear the hat. That's Sally Mapstone in the centre, and on the right there, Ian Gillespie, who is our principal, and on the far left, David Crossman, who's the principal of St Andrews. The really good thing is that's the first cohort of doctors graduated through ScotGem. Obviously, the focus is on generalism and on primary care. They will become foundation doctors. We cannot guarantee that they will become primary care doctors in the future, but I'm really hopeful they will, because they're a really focused group, and we desperately need to replenish primary care, and we need to do our best to retain them in Scotland. I would say that most took a scholarship program from Scottish Government for over the 4 years, which then commits them to staying in Scotland for 4 years afterwards. So I am hopeful that we start to see these students coming through. We've now increased to 70 per year, and we'll do a lot to address the primary care issues that we have. And I hope those of you who have had ScotGem students have recognized that they really are bringing value. It's a different way of learning, but it's working out very well. And then finally, we also partnered with the university. So we literally sold the MBCHB program to Anglia Ruskin University, which developed a new medical school. And this year, they finally got GMC accreditation. So we will retain those links with Anglia Ruskin. But it's great to see that program now, an evolved program, and a slightly different program, but working effectively down in England. And then we have Ukrainian medical students coming to train in Dundee. And in fact, tomorrow we're getting the first visitation of staff from Dnipro University, who are going to be setting up these students for a series of elective placements in Dundee. So again, I'm grateful to my NHS colleagues who will be helping host some of these students. Student support. This is a huge issue. Around about 1/3 of students will report issues with mental health. And so all universities are now looking at how we address that. And we have the same issues amongst our medical students that we see in the community. The fact is that with the recent energy crisis, we've had to have food banks for students. It's something that probably we don't all automatically think of, but it's out there. We have students who come to us from different parts of the world, and we need to support and mentor them through the process. We have students who are dealing with significant cost of living crisis, and we're going to work them. So we have put far more effort into supporting students during this, and what is an incredibly stressful, as all of us remember, MBCHB program. And you may have noticed some changes. At last, it's taken me an awful long time. If I'm going to say that there's one biggest struggle in my life as dean is working with NHS Tayside Estates on just about anything. But we are starting to change the central area. What used to be the blue carpet area when I arrived way back in 2000 now they're calling the BOP, the Burnt Orange Promenade. That central area of the university, I think we need to have more area for students, better working spaces, more comfortable areas, better flexible teaching rooms, and IT work zones. So I'm hoping you'll start to see a transformation as part of the school over the next 1 to 2 years. Finally, taught postgraduate, we do a number of courses. We have human embryology and assisted conception, which is doing both a local and a blended online course, and a number of new appointments made this year. We've got the University Department of Orthopedics and Trauma Surgery, with students from all over the world coming to do a variety of different courses, and here's and also doing some research, as you'll see in this program, led by Arpit Jaralwala. We have an MSc in psychological therapy and primary care, which we share in Stirling University. Again, this is increased massively in its cohort because of the needs in society for psychologists who work in the clinical care setting, and aligned obviously with the Scottish Government's mental health strategy. We started a new Masters in Health Data Science for Applied Precision Medicine. Big data is pretty much where everything is at the moment and where it's at, and we need more doctors. I mean, I think we need to bring this into the MBCHB program. How are you going to deal with big data, understand big data, and use big data, electronic health records to change practice? As someone who's been in this field because of Sky Diabetes and diabetes for a long time, I think we collect fabulous data. Sadly, I don't think we use that data anything like as much to change practice, and I think we've got to be much better at actually doing that. And then there's the Masters in Public Health, which has grown exponentially. And this is a direct effect of COVID, really, as much as anything else. People have suddenly recognized that public health is an incredibly important area of research, and we're seeing more and more students applying to come to Dundee to do this course, and I think that's good to see. And I'd point out that 49 of those students are international, and it's that diversity which I think you always want to see in a university town. I think it's fantastic for us to see that, something we should celebrate. But as I'll come to later on, we've got to then think about equality, diversity, and inclusion, both within NHS Tayside and within the university, because we're getting the same reports that you'd have picked up 20 years ago when we were nowhere near as diverse a culture, and something I think we've all got to be guarded against. Finally, MSc in Applied Neuroscience, led by a number of colleagues looking at a master's in neuroscience research. And CME, the Centre of Medical Education, goes from strength to strength. It's one of the real flagship programs in Dundee, and working really around the world, training medical educators in a whole variety of different countries. Finally, in the research postgraduate space, which is our PhDs, basically, we last got back into Ninewells after 2 years of COVID. So we had the first presentations. Our PhD students have, just like our taught postgraduate and our undergraduate, really suffered during this COVID period, not being able to get into the hospital. So they've come back in, we started to have posters, we started to have seminars again. And it's really good to start to re-engage and see people, as I'm sure you're all delighted to see students back in the wards again and students back in the hospital again. It really just changes the whole atmosphere of the place. We were awarded a new PhD program from the Wellcome Trust, led by my colleague here, Ewan Pearson. This is a multi-morbidity PhD program for health professionals. It's partnered with Glasgow, Edinburgh, and St Andrews. We need to create that next generation of researchers who can look at multi-morbidities. The population demographics, as you all know, are changing. And nearly 20% of the population are going to be over the age of 65. And once you're over the age of 65, if you have a disease, you're on a number of different drugs, and you have a number of different conditions. And so disease does not exist in isolation. And I personally see a move back to generalism. I guess you could go way back. I started out with a general physician with an interest in diabetes and endocrinology and became a diabetologist. I think we might have to go back to having more generalists with an interest rather than the other way around. Interesting times, I think, but that's the way the demographics are going and the way disease model is changing. And then just to highlight this bit about internationalization, there has been a massive increase in internationalization. Now, part of that is the effect of the economy, the higher education economy. Scotland is entirely reliant upon international. It costs us to teach students who are Scots domiciled, and so we're reliant on international funds. It's a Scottish government decision, not a university decision. And therefore, there's been a big growth in international students. Now, that brings with it fantastic diversity. And I think, as I've said to you, I think is essential for a university town and really essential for Scotland, which has not been particularly diverse. But it brings problems as well. We, of course, have accommodation issues, as every university does. And we're trying to look at that as much as we can. And we have to be an inclusive environment. And that culture has to be there, and it's set from the top. We have to be inclusive. So with respect to my colleagues in the NHS, medical students have done surveys, and some of the attitudes they've encountered in the hospital from patients, as well as sadly from medical staff, is just not been correct. And we must call out bad behavior. And these are some of the international partnerships we now have around the world, looking in areas like medical education, simulation-based training, and in research. So moving on to research, which is the other thing that we clearly focus on an awful lot in the medical school. I just went back. Ref 2021 was really quite good for, well, impressive really for the medical school. We were 2nd in Scotland and 11th in the UK, 3rd in Scotland, 4th in the UK for clinical medicine, UA1, 93 of our outputs being world leading. And I think that's a testament to the sort of work that all of my colleagues are doing. And there's a whole series of, as you can see, of different tables and different guidelines. What are the impact cases? So one of the things that you have to do is you have to present in REF are cases that have made a difference either nationally or internationally in terms of the quality of the risk and impact that's had on patient care. So on your left here, you see one of our impact cases, which of course came from John Dillon, which was the intelligent liver function test, which we're all aware of. But this has been shown to really increase the sensitivity and specificity of liver diagnosis and to make it far earlier, and ultimately to save the NHS an awful lot of money. And it's now spreading out to be used widely. Then on the right, you've got the work that Jacob George led on, which was to recognize the amount of sodium or salt that was in many effervescent compounds. And that's led to change in labeling around the world and will reduce the salt intake for many people on these sort of multiple different type of drugs. We had work that was done that came out of Jim Lang's group looking at an impact on the guidelines on the management of patients with valvular heart disease. And this was a report from the ACC and the AHA using this evidence to change clinical practice. And then on the right, from Blair Grubb and from Leslie Colvin, is the impact of the SIGN guideline change, largely involved by the work that they were doing on opiate prescribing in Scotland. And I think that's pretty evident. You can see when the SIGN guideline came out, practice changed, and there was a massive reduction in the number of items being prescribed per 1,000 in the population. And of course, we need to address that further, and that's part of the ongoing work within that group. And then James Chalmers, who's sort of discovered a one-man disease pretty much, his work in bronchiectasis, and has now set up collaborations throughout all of Europe, collecting information, biorepositories, clinical data on people with bronchiectasis. And as many of you know, James probably produces a paper every week, as far as I can see. I'm not sure he actually sleeps, but James has a really provided true leadership in this area, which is now changing practice around the world. And then on the right, all of us over a certain age recognize the FIT test. And this work is, again, it's transforming care. It's started out, this project within Dundee, extending out of Scotland, England, and now used automatically as this early biomarker of disease. In terms of the outputs, I'm not going to list all the outputs. I said 93% of the work leading, but you can see the major papers here, whether it's in the Lancet or whether it's in iScience or Diabetes Care or ACC or cardiology, all of the JACC. I think there's a huge amount of work, and Cell and EMBO testifying the type of work that's happening within here in Dundee itself. And then we still have the big trials that come out of the memo groups. There's a picture, I think that's Isla is up there presenting the results from the All Heart study, and Tom McDonald earlier on presenting work from the Time study, all the other way around. I don't know, but either way, the two of them presenting in major plenary talks results of these massive multi-center, thousands of people included in these type of trials, and they change practice. A time of day of when you take your drug, All Heart as well, open label blind point trial. And Memo continue to do this sort of groundbreaking work, and it's really good to see that. And other things like little apps. So this is Jacob George here with the Spot app, which is a national award for end-of-life pain relief and management. And the Centre of Medical Education is also I'm pushing really hard to see more research within this space. I'm a firm believer that a university is a higher education, not a further education facility. And sometimes the medical schools can be a little bit too much further education and not enough higher education. I think as much as research should underpin our teaching, both in terms of the science, I think there is also a science to teaching. And what I'm really keen on is to see this fantastic work that happens within the Centre of Medical Education, now far more integral to the medical school itself, that we are assessing what we do. I mean, you should not be able to implement a change, like a new curriculum or an agents of change model, without actually assessing that it's actually doing what you think it's going to do and that it's an effective intervention. Because if it doesn't work, we shouldn't continue with it just because we think it's a good idea, as we tend to do quite a lot within the NHS anyway. And I think it's really good to see my colleagues taking on. I think they're really enthused by this. And it's great to see both scholarship and research and education developing in the school, and something that we will support as one of our core activities going forward. Then we have the big grants as well, particularly in the area of pain. Leslie Colvin, Brea Glubb, Tim Hales, they brought in 3 major grants, nearly 10.5 million, along with Hick and Emily Jefferson. Again, using electronic health records. It's something which we've spent most of our time doing, electronic health record research linked with bioresources, precision medicine type approaches, looking about how we can identify pain early, how we can best treat pain, and how we can look at environmental factors that contribute to pain in the long term, and what factors lead to how people manifest pain later on in life. We have the big iDiabetes project that there's a whole number of us involved, but obviously Ewan Pearson, I think, is leading this project. This is a really ambitious project where we are randomizing literally the entire diabetes population of Tayside. 17,000 people are going to be randomized, 10,000 into a more precision diabetes approach, where we're trying to get people on the right drug at the right time, based upon markers like NT-proBNP and echocardiography and fatty liver assessment with the ILFTs. And then ensuring that there are persistence with the medication. And also, are we addressing quality health inequalities? So we're making sure that all parts of our population are able to access this therapy. And then, of course, built into this is economic modeling, and does it work? And if it does work, then it extends throughout Scotland. And then we have Alex Dunny's trial on clopidogrel, again, another example of precision medicine. As most of you know, the CYP genes affect your ability to metabolize clopidogrel. So we have many people who are put on this after a stroke who do not need and cannot use the clopidogrel effectively. So can we use our bioresources and our genetics to make sure we get the right treatment to people right from diagnosis? And then, as you know, again, we move away from broad diagnoses like broad type 2 diabetes and here to bronchiectasis. And it turns out, of course, that bronchiectasis is not a single disease, that within it there are many different types of endotypes. So endotypes are effectively subtypes of a disease that have distinct mechanisms. And James Chalmers and his group, working with Amelia Schumacher and Alison Dicker and Jeffrey Huang, are using proteomics and looking at the microbiome and to try and determine what are the different endotypes, disease endotypes within bronchiectasis, and therefore what are the most appropriate treatments for individuals within that space. We have been awarded, a number of people have been awarded prizes and fellowships. So Tom MacDonald got the Lilly Prize from the British Pharmacological Society, and the John Freely Lecture and Memorial Medal from the Irish Association of Pharmacologists. And I'm sure Tom was singing on the stage at that presentation. Ewan Pearson was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society, and Adrian Sorin had a Wellcome Trust Investigator. And I think I even got the sympathy vote from Diabetes UK, I think, and was given an award lecture last year. We have Early Career Investigator Awards. Surat Banerjee with a really competitive and successful UKRI Future Leaders Award. Alison McNeely with her fellowship of the Springboard Fellowship from the Academy of Medical Sciences. Fiona McLean, Alzheimer's Research UK. Harry Herbert, Postdoctoral Research Assistant Award for the National Institute of the Academic Anaesthetists. And Marette Long, who had a very successful PhD with James Chalmers, doing a British Association for Lung Research Early Career Investigator Awards. So it's great to see these new career fellows achieving these fellowships, which are so important when you're first starting out on your research career. And we had the influencers, Blair Smith and Albena Dinkova-Kostova, two of the most highly cited investigators in the world. I mean, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Their work is held in such high regard that there are many, many thousands, I can tell you, to be in that sort of level, you're getting many, many thousands of citations of your work every year. So fantastic, and many congratulations to the two of them. Our health informatics core continues to go from strength to strength. I won't go through all of these. Suffice to say that the health informatics core is now a big group of about 50 odd people with multiple grants. And all I would say to you is that big data is so fundamentally important to all we do that it is worthwhile learning about data, thinking at a very, very early stage about how you can put your patient population into data and therefore analyze that data and look hard about what you're doing. Sky Diabetes, which is fantastically successful, has almost 100,000 people with diabetes on it, started out as a simple diabetes register in Dundee and is now expanded to this huge database that really determines almost all of what we do in clinical practice. And these are just some more grants that are awarded by the Health Informatics Corps, a key part of the School of Medicine. Finally, clinical trials, research and development. Well, there was a change in the NHS R&D lead. Jacob George stepped down to move on to do other things, and Russell Petty, Professor Russell Petty, has taken over. This figure is simply to say that we pretty much stopped doing all clinical trial research activity with COVID, other than vaccine trials, and now things are beginning to come back again. And but slowly, we've been hit as a country very, very hard by Brexit. You'll have seen the news that AstraZeneca moved to Dublin the other day. Britain used to be a leading figure in particularly commercial research, which is important actually, because by getting people in cancer trials or new novel therapies for diabetes or cardiovascular disease, A, it saves the NHS a huge amount of money, but B, we can see what therapies are actually going to improve outcomes. And Britain is no longer the focus of this type of commercial research, largely because of Brexit, unfortunately, and it's another thing that we're having to deal with. But I know Russell is working with the group down in Task to see what we can try and do to try and drive clinical research. And I'm very, very keen again that NHS consultants, if they can, just think hard about engaging when these type of, it's hard when job plans are not entirely flexible. There are opportunities through the NRS to get fellowship and get NRS sessions, but we need more and more consultants engaging in research, I think, and other healthcare professionals if we really want to improve care for the people in Tayside. Outcomes are better in teaching hospitals that work as teaching hospitals, where the clinical staff broadly are engaged in research. And I think research is not as integral to the NHS as it used to be. And Dundee has been leading, you'll mostly have seen this, the work on an incisionless surgery, focused ultrasound for Parkinson's disease, and Tom Gilbertson is working with colleagues, and it's been fantastic to see the development, initially with intractable tremor, now moving to the first trials of Parkinson's disease, and hopefully we'll now extend this therapy to a number of other conditions. And that is partnered here by Esther Samler and her group, who are looking at identifying people with these LRRK2 mutations in Parkinson's disease, so we can, with specific assays, because we can then develop therapies that target this section. It's around just under 4% of people with Parkinson's disease. But again, if we can, this links in closely with the work that's being done in Parkinson's disease biology in the School of Life Sciences. And so there's a translational pathway there from biology to biomarker development to interventions such as our drugs or focused ultrasound. Overall funding, around about 20 million last year in our funding, with overhead, which is the money that comes to support the university from a whole load of different sources. Slightly down on the year before, but not surprising really with the impact of COVID. And again, something we're going to definitely try and correct in the next year to increase the amount that we do, because it enables all the work that we do. Commercialization, I mentioned earlier on, it's been really an area that universities are now focusing on, and with the innovation leads at NHS Tayside, with Colin Fleming and a few others, I think it's something that we need to think about doing, because it's about job creation in locally in Dundee, and spin out companies and doing things that are a little bit different. So we're bringing that in. So we have now venture competitions for our medical students. We have competitions for our staff. And then when people do have a good idea, there's the Centre for Entrepreneurship here in Dundee. There are programs and there are expertise, and we can take people through the commercialization process. Not everything is going to work, of course. Only probably 1 in 10, if that, is likely to ever work. But good ideas do well. My Diabetes My Way was one of the last major spin-outs that we had in Dundee, but is now being used all over the world. And that's a joint venture between the University of Dundee and NHS Tayside and the CSO. And I think that it's something that is good for Scotland, and we're keen to develop this aspect of our work. Here's another example of the work. And we know this time I do have video going on soft robotics, which Sir Alfred Kasheri tells me is absolutely going to be the future of surgery now, rather than rigid sigmoidoscopes and rigid endoscopes. We're moving quickly towards soft robotics, and it's a fascinating to see these things change and what's happening. Even the pill, the endo pill that we take, they think will be replaced by these in the future. And Luigi Manfredi is one of our early career fellows, is now taking on this work, and even has a small venture spin-out company here, which is now moving into the high growth arm of spin-out based upon the really exciting work that he's doing in this space. A number of special projects that we've been doing over the last year. The biggest change, and this is one I believe that they presented, if they haven't, Tom, they should present on the Grand Round, which is a Centre for Medical Engineering and Technology. Obviously, for many, many years, we had Wilson House and Storts, and that was a single relationship with a company that worked in surgery, non-invasive surgery, for a long time. That changed over the years, and we're now partnered up with the School of Engineering to see what we can do and redevelop the whole of Wilson House, so that we now can think of how we can bring in biomedical engineering much more closely to practice. And what I'm keen, and I'll show you another slide later on, is for all of you NHS consultants, particularly those who are thinking about working with areas, non-invasive areas, the vascular surgeons, the anaesthetists, etc., to think how we might link up in this space, because there's some fantastic little biomedical engineers looking for clinical collaborators. And if we can bring them together in Wilson House, think about what we can do to improve outcomes. We'll bring in the health informatics course so we can link that to data. I think this could be a really exciting space. And again, hopefully we will build that next generation of small SMEs, small companies that will improve health outcomes, but also employ people in Dundee. So Wilson House is going to become part of this TIME project, which is the Tayside Innovation MedTech ecosystem. There's going to be a digital hub. We have manufacturing labs inside there, digital innovation, cutting edge clinical facilities. We've obviously got the MRI scanners, angio suites. We have the unique teal cadaver resource. And I'm hoping again that this is a place where we can come together and think about these sort of technologies and improving health outcomes. So Time Neuro is an example of that, where we've just brought in the first mobile photon counting CT scanner specifically for the brain in Europe, which is good to see. There's an awful lot of income coming in. We're doing work, particularly, as you know, in stroke thrombectomy and those sort of areas. And I think it's really good to see a lot of training in that space, and it's transforming the time to therapy. And if we move towards the quality of the CT scan in the ambulance, where we can literally thrombolize at the bedside, what a difference that's going to make to people's outcomes. And these are the teal cadavers. I mean, most small companies will go to the pig or the animal model in order to test out new procedures. But of course, we can do that with teal, which is a way of looking at new prostheses, for instance, in the heart of cardiologists. I saw John Irving on call. If John wants to get involved in stent work or other things in the heart, we'd be delighted to speak with John and to see what might be done in this space, working together. And then our people, often they don't get the shout out, but these on your left side, you'll see all the CRC nurses who during COVID stopped working within the CRC and went into the wards and helped with the research trials that James and others were doing. So going into the COVID wards, and it's really good to see them doing that and all joining in. And on the bottom right, we have all of our ops team and people who look after our space and many of the activities in Dundee. Again, not often credited. Prepared a lot of space for NHS during COVID, which NHS Tayside liked so much they decided to keep, but that's the way of things. But again, hats off to them. They do a great work for us all in the school. And then just to let you know that we've spent a lot of time, my colleague Robert Holmes has spent a huge amount of time trying to reform our honorary process. You know, honorary system should not be an old boys network. It should be something in which we can reward staff within NHS Tayside who are doing far more above and beyond in terms of their teaching contribution, their research contributions, their international presence, etc. And so I'm really keen that we make this open to staff. We have a committee that's now going to meet once a year with both representation from NHS Tayside as well as from the university to look at applications. And again, when people do work above and beyond, I'm keen that we reward them. But I'm also keen to maintain that relationship, that I don't just say you're an honorary reader, an honorary chair, and then we never see you again. I think we need to be working together much more collaborative and collectively to see how we can move forward. And so we move back to being that type of teaching hospital where we have a blend of full-time NHS, we have clinical academics, we have more university funded, and we have honorary staff. Because I think that's the sort of environment that, well, I always wanted to work in, and I think is better for the hospital as a whole. And this is again just talking about the new, and of course Professor Tom Farden, one of the first honorary professors last year, as well as Arpit Jarawala and Sean Walsh. And I'm hiding behind my picture here is Lee Jordan, but unfortunately for Sean and Lee, I didn't have a picture for them and I couldn't find. But we have a huge number of honorary staff. There's nearly 900 honorary staff in the medical school. Can create problems, but again, I think it's just testament to how much collaborative working is going on. The other thing to focus on, of course, that any medical school focuses on and any organization should focus on is its culture. And there's a lot of work done now looking at our school culture, our research culture, mentoring systems in place. It wasn't traditionally done within universities, but everybody who's starting out on an academic career needs to have mentorship. But we need to think about also our postdoc students and our PhD students. So again, it's about supporting them and thinking about their careers and the different ways that they're going forward. I'm very keen on the idea of social responsibility. This year, we're going to trial the idea with members of staff, of the medical school can have 3 or 4 days a year where we're obviously paying them, but they're going to volunteer in the local community. And Jenny Harvey, our Associate Dean, is going to be looking at how we can look at the social purpose, and not just for medical students, but also from our staff. We can't be town and gown. It's about if we are we off Dundee and for Dundee, and therefore taking part in our local broader community. So I'm keen to see how that progresses. And of course, we need to call out bad behavior. It's been far too much of it for far too long in the NHS. And that relates to diversity issues, issues of age, sex, and all the minority characteristics we need to be thinking about and promoting, and ensuring progression in careers from people from a whole sort of different backgrounds. Because you need to have representation, I think, at every level. In any sort of organization that wants to be called inclusive. And Lee Kang and Evie Ferratu are helping lead in this program we had one of the big lectures last year from Katie Pettit-Siphon gave a lecture to us. We have an LGBT History Month, a Black History Month. We have a schools women's staff network, and we've obviously been looking at implementing the Athena Swan and the BMA race charter, and of course into our MBCHB program. That's why we've asked people to think very much about the images we're using. We're a global program and we have global students, and so that needs to be represented in our teaching materials. And then here we obviously have to think about sustainability, the last but not least. So we now have a committee that is looking at that, led by Jill Belch and Richard Scrivener, and involving both our students, doing what's called the planetary health report card, looking at what we're actually doing within our curriculum. I told you sustainability was part of what we're doing, but other projects like Gwen Kennedy led on a great project to show that if you reduce the -80 freezers to -70, it didn't make any difference to your sample, but the saving in terms of energy was huge. So now we're going to go around, of course, and reduce all of our -80s to -70s. And again, we're going to work closely with the sustainability champions with NHS Tayside to look and see what we can do and see how much energy we're wasting, our use of materials such as plastics and everything else. So thank you. That's a sort of whistle-stop tour through all the work. I hope you'll agree that there's lots of things happening in lots of different areas. And then my final word, of course, is to thank you all, because I know that we couldn't, as a medical school, be doing it without you in NHS Tayside. And it's because of all that work that we're doing that I think Dundee is the successful medical school that it actually is. So Tom, back over to you.
Thanks very much. Just reflecting here with Dave Connell, who I share an office with, but just how much work that is. Just never mind the quality, which is beyond doubt. It's just a volume of it. There's a huge amount of stuff going on, and most of that is not visible to us in NHS. And I think it's really worthwhile, really valuable you coming and giving this talk. And I appreciate you giving it already before Christmas, and you have to do the same thing again. But I'm really grateful that you do that. And obviously we do put it up onto YouTube, and so you get that share and that visibility. And I hope that's all right with you. You mentioned a number of people who have spoken at Grand Rounds. It's nice that we've got that engagement. And obviously, so James has been here and spoken about his work. Ewan Pearson's spoken about his work. The worm endoscopy thing that works its way through your colon. We had a fantastic talk on that in the middle of COVID. So we are updated with some of this work, but it's great to see the end result. So that's really fantastic. And obviously the sustainability stuff, and climate responsibility, global citizenship stuff. We do try to have a focus on that here at Grand Rounds, but great to see some of the output. Claire Webster has said in the chat, will you feedback on the social responsibility project at a later date?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to pilot the scheme, obviously, first of all. But I think it's really interesting. It's a re-envisaging about what a university is actually about. And, it is that the old model was the sort of town and gown, the ivory tower on the hill. It didn't really interact with the local community. And that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense for medicine, because most of us will be working with our communities, either directly because we're in primary care or indirectly through our type of roles in the specialty service. And so, yeah, really important to get out and to do that and show that we have a responsibility. So I will feedback, because I think we're very interested to see what happens. I think from these models are not new. They've happened elsewhere, and they've been very, very successful, and make the workforce are much happier, feel they're doing things, and they're supported by the organization to do it.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any comments? A hand up or a chat? Rob Mountain, well known to this parish. Thank you for a wonderful update. I need to be updated on the new medical structure for our final year medical students. I'm not sure if he's asking for that update right now.
Yeah, he's asking the right person here. The exam structure. I think you'll have to talk to Richard Day for that one.
But he brings up an important
they only
point.
do an OSCE in the final year anyway. So year 4 is the final exam. So yeah.
Ellie has reassured him that there's no real changes just now. But I think he brings up an important point that we do rely on a lot of NHS colleagues to staff those OSCEs and a lot of the examining, and just keeping us up to date with those curriculum changes and is really important. But I think it's a challenge, isn't it? I did quite a lot of undergraduate stuff in my day, and what should a fourth year medical student look like compared to a second year medical student is not that obvious a thing. It is a spectrum, and people come at different times. It's a very challenging process. So a lot of work going on, I know, with the assessment lead and Ellie obviously driving all that along to make sure we're still pumping out more, but still the same high quality medical students and young doctors. So it's great.
So Rod raises the point about a UK-wide exam, and the answer is yes, there is, Rod. It's called the MLA, the Medical Licensing Association, and it's going to be something that we will implement. And Ellie can probably update everybody about it at some point, but that is going to be, and the sad thing is, I think within a few years' time, although they've said it won't happen, there'll be league tables based upon the LLA, and then of course medical students will only focus on the MLA and not other aspects of what we do. It's always one of the real challenges, as you know, of medical education. I think we're looking very hard at assessment. I think assessment has to be useful and it has to be supportive. And if it's not, why are we doing it? And I think, and alluding to what you're saying as well, Tom, we can't just keep adding to the course, and we can't keep adding to the demands. So, for instance, with invigilation for OSCEs, yes, absolutely, you need to have clinicians. But for things like exams that are computer-based, well, you don't. You can use PhD students and postdocs. And so we need to be thinking about are working with our colleagues where they're needed, but not where they're not, because everyone is faced this capacity problems at the moment with work.
Jen has handily put into the chat the link so you can sign up for an OSCE right now. If you're itching to go, please click the link or copy it for later. Okay, everyone. So I did mention that we now have this magical QR code that you can scan in so that you can register that you've been here, whether you're sat in your office or sat at home or you're watching this on YouTube. You can scan in the thing, and if I can share my screen, I can show it to you now. It says padding for time. Here it comes. I should have set this up in time, shouldn't I? Here you go. So you should see it now. So you can scan that with your phone, and that will take you to the form that allows you to fill in the bits and pieces of what you've heard today, a bit of feedback, reflection, and then you get a certificate emailed to you within minutes for your own e-portfolio or for your appraisal processes. Rory, thanks again for coming. Look forward to you coming back to speak about your own research interests later on in the semester. And I should know what's happening next week, but I don't have the timetable in front of me. I'm sure it'll be marvelous, and I'll send you an email at the beginning of next week to let you know. If you're watching this on YouTube, click like, subscribe, click the little bell, and thank you very much for joining in. Take care, everyone. I'll see you next week.